There are moments when silence feels like strength, when staying quiet seems wiser than speaking, when holding your words feels safer than releasing them. But listen carefully. There is a difference between chosen silence and trained silence. One is power, the other is control. This silence did not arrive overnight. It was taught, conditioned, rehearsed through small moments you barely noticed, a look that lingered too long, a pause that felt heavy, a reaction that made you question yourself. Slowly, carefully, your voice was associated with discomfort, with tension, with loss. And so without being told directly, you learned the lesson: say less to survive more. This is not about weakness. This is about psychology, about how the human mind adapts when expression is repeatedly punished and silence is repeatedly rewarded, about how your thoughts became negotiations, your emotions became liabilities, and your truth became something you only whispered to yourself. But here is the truth they never wanted you to realize: silence that is forced is not peace, it is containment. And the moment you understand how it was created, you begin to understand how it can be broken. Tonight we are not raising our voices, we are reclaiming them. Silence is not your nature, it is carefully conditioned. You were not born quiet, you were not designed to hesitate before speaking, to measure every sentence, to swallow discomfort and call it patience. Silence was not your original language, it was learned. And like all learned behaviors, it was taught through repetition, emotional consequence, and psychological pressure so subtle that you may not have recognized it while it was happening. It begins in ordinary moments. You express a concern calmly, respectfully, without accusation. Instead of resolution, you are met with tension, a pause, a shift in energy. Sometimes it is dismissal, sometimes disappointment, sometimes a quiet withdrawal that feels heavier than any argument. Nothing dramatic is said, yet something unmistakable is communicated. Your words have consequences. The mind takes note. The nervous system remembers, not consciously at first, but instinctively. Over time, a pattern forms. Speaking up is followed by discomfort. Staying quiet is followed by calm. And the human brain, designed for survival, adapts quickly. It starts choosing what feels safer. You learn to reduce yourself not because you want to, but because your system has been trained to associate silence with stability. This is not cowardice. This is conditioning at work. Conditioning does not require cruelty. It does not require shouting or overt dominance. In fact, the most effective conditioning is gentle, almost invisible. A raised eyebrow, a sigh, a delayed response. These small signals act as behavioral cues, teaching you which version of yourself is acceptable and which one disrupts the emotional environment. Slowly, you begin to adjust, not to be heard, but to avoid emotional cost. What makes this process powerful is that it feels logical. You tell yourself you are being mature, patient, understanding. You believe you are choosing peace, but peace that requires self-erasure is not peace, it is compliance. Yet the mind reframes it as wisdom because that framing hurts less than the truth. The truth is that you are adapting to an unspoken rule. Your voice must be controlled for harmony to exist. As this conditioning deepens, silence no longer feels forced. It feels natural, automatic. You stop noticing the pauses where words used to live. You stop reaching for language to describe your discomfort. Not because the discomfort is gone, but because you have learned that naming it changes the atmosphere in ways that feel unsafe. So you internalize it, you rationalize it, you carry it quietly. Eventually, something more concerning happens. You begin to believe this silence is who you are, that you are simply not expressive, not confrontational, not the type to speak up. This belief is the final success of conditioning, when adaptation is mistaken for identity. When survival strategies are mistaken for personality traits, when restraint is praised so often that you forget it was never a choice to begin with. But silence that is trained has a cost. It accumulates internally. Unspoken words do not disappear. They settle. They turn into tension, fatigue, emotional distance from yourself. You may feel drained without knowing why, disconnected without understanding from what. This is the weight of suppressed expression. The body remembers what the mouth was taught to forget. Recognizing this is not about blame, it is about awareness. Once you understand that your silence was shaped, not chosen, you regain something critical: agency. Conditioning works only when it remains unconscious. The moment you see the pattern, it begins to weaken. The pauses become visible. The emotional cues lose their authority. You realize that discomfort after speaking was not proof that you were wrong. It was proof that honesty disrupted control. And here is the most important truth: the ability to speak never left you. It was only paused, stored beneath layers of adaptation and self-protection. You do not need to become louder. You do not need to become aggressive. You only need to become aware. Awareness restores choice, and choice is where your voice begins to return. Silence was not your nature, it was installed, and anything installed can be removed. Your words were never the problem, the reframing was. When someone wants to control your voice, they rarely attack the truth directly. Instead, they change the meaning of your words. They take what you say and quietly turn it into something else. Concern becomes complaint. Curiosity becomes accusation. Boundaries become rejection. Over time, this reframing teaches a powerful lesson. Speaking creates problems. And once that lesson settles in, silence begins to feel like intelligence rather than fear. At first, the shift is subtle. You raise a simple question hoping for clarity, and the response you receive focuses not on the question but on your tone. You are told you are too sensitive, too intense, or reading too much into things. The original issue disappears, replaced by an evaluation of how you expressed it. Without realizing it, you are pulled into defending your delivery instead of discussing the content. The conversation moves away from truth and towards self-justification. This tactic works because it destabilizes confidence. When the focus is redirected from what you are saying to how you are saying it, you begin to doubt yourself. You start editing your words before they leave your mouth. You rehearse conversations internally, trying to find a version of yourself that will not trigger dismissal. In doing so, you slowly accept the idea that your natural expression is flawed. Reframing also carries emotional weight. When your words are consistently portrayed as harmful, disruptive, or unnecessary, you begin to associate speaking with guilt. You feel responsible for tension even when you did not create it. This emotional burden is heavy and the mind seeks relief. Silence offers that relief, not because it solves the issue, but because it removes the immediate emotional pressure placed on you. Over time, you internalize the reframing. You begin questioning your right to speak at all. You ask yourself if it is worth bringing something up. You downplay your needs before anyone else can. This is not growth. It is self-silencing learned through repeated misinterpretation. The danger here is not just quiet. It is distortion of self-trust. What makes reframing especially powerful is that it often sounds reasonable. It is presented as concern, maturity, or emotional intelligence. You are encouraged to be calm, be understanding, or let things go. These phrases, when used appropriately, are healthy. But when they are used selectively, only when you speak up, they become tools of control. They teach you that emotional responsibility lies entirely with you, while the original behavior remains unexamined. Eventually, your words stop feeling like tools for connection and start feeling like risks. You choose silence not because you lack thoughts, but because you have been taught that expressing them will be used against you. This is how reframing reshapes reality. It does not erase your voice, it convinces you that your voice is the source of the problem. The turning point comes when you recognize the pattern. When you notice that the conversation consistently shifts away from behavior and toward your reaction. When you realize that clarity is met with criticism, while silence is met with ease. This awareness restores perspective. It allows you to see that your words were not destructive, they were inconvenient. Reclaiming your voice does not require confrontation. It requires grounding. It means stating rather than explaining, observing rather than defending. When you stop arguing with the reframing, it loses power. Your words regain their original purpose, to express, not to justify. Your words were never the problem. The problem was a system that taught you to doubt them. When emotional distance becomes a warning, you learn to obey. Silence is often taught not through words, but through absence. There is a particular kind of lesson the human mind learns when honesty is followed by emotional distance. No argument, no explanation, just a sudden shift in warmth. Connection fades, presence feels conditional. And without a single sentence being spoken, a powerful message is delivered. Your truth costs you closeness. At first, this distance feels confusing. You speak openly, perhaps about something that matters to you, and the response is not dialogue but withdrawal. Conversations shorten. Affection becomes restrained. The atmosphere changes in ways that are difficult to describe, yet impossible to ignore. You search your memory, replaying your words, trying to locate the exact moment things shifted. This search itself becomes part of the conditioning. Human beings are wired for connection. When connection is threatened, the nervous system reacts immediately. Emotional distance activates fear, not dramatic fear, but quiet alertness, the kind that makes you more careful, more observant, more willing to adjust. Over time, your system begins to associate honesty with loss and loss with danger. Silence then becomes a protective instinct rather than a conscious decision. What makes emotional withdrawal such an effective tool is its ambiguity. There is no clear accusation to respond to, no argument to resolve. You are left to fill in the gaps yourself, and most people, wanting to restore harmony, assume responsibility. You tell yourself you should have phrased things differently, that you should have waited, that maybe it was not worth saying at all. In this way, emotional distance teaches obedience without ever demanding it. Gradually, your behavior changes. You become more attentive to mood shifts. You learn to read pauses, tones, and timing. You start speaking less, not because you have less to say, but because you are monitoring the emotional climate. Your words are filtered through one primary question. Will this create distance? If the answer feels uncertain, silence wins. This is how survival replaces authenticity. You begin prioritizing connection over expression, even when that connection feels one-sided. You convince yourself that maintaining closeness requires sacrifice, and that sacrifice must come from you. The cost is subtle but significant. You remain present but not fully seen. You are there, but not entirely yourself. Over time, the pattern deepens. Emotional withdrawal no longer needs to happen frequently. The memory of it is enough. The mind anticipates the outcome and adjusts in advance. You silence yourself before distance can occur. This anticipation is the final stage of conditioning, when the lesson has been fully absorbed and no longer needs reinforcement. Yet emotional distance is not communication. It does not resolve. It does not clarify. It simply controls. And control thrives in silence. Once you recognize this, the dynamic shifts. You begin to understand that closeness maintained through self-erasure is not intimacy. It is compliance disguised as harmony. Reclaiming yourself in this space does not require dramatic change. It requires awareness and grounding. It means noticing when connection feels conditional, when warmth appears only in response to your silence, when presence is offered as a reward rather than shared freely. These observations restore clarity. True connection does not demand that you disappear. It does not punish honesty with absence. When you stop interpreting emotional distance as a verdict on your worth, its power weakens. You begin to see it not as a signal to obey, but as information about the relationship itself. Emotional distance was used as a warning. Awareness turns that warning into a choice. Self-doubt was planted until you began silencing yourself. There comes a stage where silence no longer needs to be enforced from the outside. It becomes internal, automatic. You begin questioning yourself before anyone else has the chance to. This is not coincidence. This is the result of self-doubt being carefully planted and quietly nurtured over time until it grows into a system that governs your thoughts, your words, and your decisions. At first, the doubt feels reasonable. You replay conversations in your mind, wondering if you misunderstood something. You ask yourself whether your expectations were too high, your feelings too intense, your timing imperfect. These questions appear responsible, even mature. But when they arise every time you consider speaking, they stop being reflective and start becoming restrictive. You are no longer evaluating situations. You are evaluating your right to respond to them. This internal questioning slowly reshapes your relationship with your own perceptions. You begin to distrust your emotional signals. Discomfort is labeled as exaggeration. Confusion is dismissed as overthinking. Intuition is treated as suspicion rather than insight. Each time you override your internal signals, self-doubt tightens its grip. The voice that once guided you becomes something you argue with or ignore altogether. What makes this stage so effective is that it feels self-generated. There is no visible pressure anymore, no clear source. The control has been absorbed. You are not being told to stay quiet. You are telling yourself it is wiser to do so. This creates the illusion of choice, even though the choice was shaped by repeated experiences where speaking led to negative outcomes. Over time, self-censorship becomes routine. You edit your thoughts before they form into sentences. You imagine potential reactions and decide it is safer not to speak. You postpone conversations indefinitely, waiting for a better moment that never arrives. This constant postponement slowly erodes your sense of presence. You exist in the space, but you do not fully participate in it. The most damaging part of internalized self-doubt is that it disconnects you from clarity. When you no longer trust your perception, everything becomes uncertain. You seek validation for feelings that should not require permission. You look outward for confirmation of truths you already sense. And when confirmation does not come, you retreat further into silence. Yet self-doubt is not evidence of inaccuracy. It is evidence of repeated invalidation. It is what happens when your experiences are questioned often enough that you begin questioning them yourself. Understanding this reframes the entire narrative. The problem was never that you were unclear. It was that clarity was inconvenient. Breaking free from this stage begins with observation rather than confrontation. You notice the moments you stop yourself, the sentences you delete before they are spoken, the feelings you minimize before acknowledging. These moments reveal how deeply the system runs. Awareness loosens its hold. Reclaiming your voice here is not about confidence in performance. It is about trust in perception. It means allowing yourself to feel without immediately correcting yourself, to name discomfort without justifying it, to recognize that self-doubt was installed, not earned. When you stop silencing yourself internally, external control loses its foundation. The system collapses quietly just as it was built, and in that quiet, your voice begins to return, steady, grounded, and yours again. The moment you choose your voice, control begins to dissolve. There is a moment, often quiet, often unnoticed, when everything changes, not because someone else shifts, but because you do. It is the moment you realize that silence has been costing you more than speaking ever did. This realization does not arrive with anger or drama. It arrives with clarity, and clarity is the one thing control cannot survive. Breaking silence does not mean raising your voice. It means ending the habit of explaining yourself into exhaustion. It means stating what is true without rehearsing it 10 times in your head. For so long, your words were shaped by anticipation of misunderstanding, withdrawal, or tension. Choosing your voice is choosing to release that anticipation. You speak not to manage reactions, but to honor reality. Control depends on confusion, on blurred lines, on unspoken rules you are expected to follow without ever agreeing to them. The moment you speak with calm certainty, those rules begin to lose power, not because you are fighting them, but because you are no longer participating in them. Silence kept the system intact. Clarity exposes it. At first, using your voice may feel unfamiliar, even uncomfortable. That discomfort is not a sign of danger, it is a sign of change. You are interrupting a pattern that once kept you safe. The nervous system needs time to recalibrate. Speaking from a grounded place without urgency or apology teaches your system a new lesson. Expression does not equal loss. With repetition, this lesson replaces the old one. Choosing your voice also changes your internal world. You stop negotiating with yourself before speaking. You no longer ask for permission to feel. Your thoughts move outward instead of circling endlessly inside. This outward movement restores energy. It brings you back into presence. You are no longer disappearing to keep the peace. You are participating honestly. What often surprises people at this stage is how little needs to be said. Control made everything feel complicated. Freedom simplifies. You speak less, but with more weight. You explain less, but with more clarity. Your words are not sharpened, they are steady, and steadiness is disarming. Not everyone will welcome this shift. Some dynamics rely on your silence to function. When you stop self-editing, the imbalance becomes visible. This visibility is not something to fear, it is information. It shows you where connection was dependent on your quiet compliance rather than mutual respect. Choosing your voice does not guarantee agreement, it guarantees alignment with yourself. And alignment is grounding. It removes the constant inner conflict between what you feel and what you say. This internal peace is what real stability feels like. Not the fragile calm that required suppression, but a solid presence that can hold truth without collapse. Over time, silence transforms. It is no longer a cage, it becomes a choice. You speak when it matters. You remain quiet when you choose, not when you are trained to. This difference is everything. Choice restores dignity. The moment you choose your voice, control does not explode, it fades, quietly, inevitably, because control only survives where awareness is absent. And once you are aware, once you are grounded, once you are aligned, your voice becomes the end of the system that tried to silence it.